My name is Emma, and I'm a 33-year-old who has navigated a complicated relationship with my mother, who chose her new family over me. The emotional fallout of this decision has led me on a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and, ultimately, healing. My story begins with my mother, who was just 20 when she had me. My biological father was never in the picture. According to my mom, he had never wanted to have children with her. They had been together for only a few months when she got pregnant, and upon discovering this, she gave him the choice to leave. He took her up on that offer. Their breakup was bitter, and my mother chose not to seek child support from him, as he wasn't willing to offer any. It was convenient for both of them to simply cut ties and never speak again. Thankfully, my maternal grandparents were very supportive. They were always there for my mother, which allowed her to complete her education and eventually secure a job. Growing up, I watched my mom date a couple of men, but it wasn't until I was around 8 years old that she started dating Harry, a man she had worked with. They dated for almost 3 years before getting married. Harry and I got along well enough. It wasn't like we were super attached, but he didn't hate me, and we were cool with each other's presence in the house. After they got married, my mom became pregnant, and everyone was thrilled, especially me. In hindsight, I should have seen the writing on the wall regarding how things would change, but I was too caught up in the belief that my mom would always be there for me. I knew she had faced many hardships while raising me alone, so I assumed she wouldn't let all that go to waste and abandon me. Even though I noticed us starting to drift apart after her marriage to Harry, I thought it was a temporary phase and that things would eventually improve. I tried my best to be supportive during her pregnancy, but she often became irritable when I was around, so I decided to make myself scarce, thinking it might help. 6 months after she gave birth to twins, she and Harry called me in for a serious discussion. At just 16 years old, I was still a minor and they couldn't legally kick me out without consequences. Instead, they tried to nudge me towards moving out by complaining about how hard it was becoming for them to support our growing family. I honestly didn't think that 2 adults, 1 teenager, and 2 babies would be impossible to support on the income of 2 web developers. They had provided us with a comfortable lifestyle, and it was evident to me that they were bluffing, just trying to find a way to get rid of me. When I suggested that I could get a job to help ease their financial burden, my mother dismissed it. She insisted she wanted to save resources for the kids who actually deserved it more, referring to the twins. Hearing her say that was all I needed to decide I needed to leave. They didn't even tell me where to go, they just wanted me out. It was clear I wasn't wanted, and their passive-aggressive tactics had pushed me into a corner. After leaving that day, I headed straight to my grandparents' place. They were unhappy about my mother's decision, but chose not to cut her off because they still wanted to be there for the twins. My grandparents were getting older, and I knew I couldn't rely on them financially. At 16, I took on a part-time job to support myself. Over the years, I would occasionally see my mother and Harry when they visited my grandparents with the kids, but they rarely asked about me. They were mostly formal, treating me like a stranger. It was heartbreaking to realize that they seemed happier without me in their lives. I stayed with my grandparents until it was time for college, and during that period, my mother continued to ignore me. When I graduated high school, it was just my grandparents who attended. My mother didn't even bother to congratulate me. I had to rely on friends to help me settle into my dorm since my grandparents weren't physically fit enough to assist. I took out student loans to pay for college, needing my uncle to co-sign since my mother and Harry had refused, stating they wanted to save their resources for the twins' future. Fortunately, my uncle agreed, provided that he wouldn't have to pay any money if I defaulted. I worked hard throughout college, determined not to default on any payments, all while focusing on my education. Once I graduated, I moved out to stand on my own. The first couple of years were challenging financially as I tried to cover rent, groceries, and utilities while still reducing my debt. It was a limited income, but I persevered. Eventually, I worked my way up in the company I joined after graduation. It wasn't easy, but I was proud of my journey, especially considering I had done it with little support. Almost 8 years later, I found myself in an upper management position in the same company where I started. 4 months ago, I received a promotion, and very few people knew because I wanted to keep it private. One person I did share it with was my uncle, so I could thank him for being my co-signer back in college. Unbeknownst to me, he met my mom and Harry at a family gathering and mentioned my promotion, prompting them to reach out. When they showed up at my house, I was unprepared for the confrontation that ensued. Instead of congratulating me, they began to talk about how they had heard about my promotion and were surprised I hadn't kept them updated. I was shocked that they expected me to share my life with them after years of estrangement. They quickly shifted the conversation to how difficult the past couple of years had been for them since they had started their own business, which had unfortunately failed. They wanted to know if I could help with their financial struggles, particularly concerning the twins' college expenses. When I realized they were here to ask me for money, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. I told them that I was not going to help financially, considering they had chosen to prioritize their new family over me and had kicked me out when I was a teenager. Their gaslighting tactics were exhausting, and I firmly refused to be manipulated into giving them anything. When I demanded they leave, they became offended and turned the conversation back on me, saying I had distanced myself from them and that I was acting ungrateful. They claimed that they had sacrificed so much for me, which I found laughable since I had done everything on my own after they kicked me out. The argument escalated, with my mother resorting to emotionally charged language and trying to guilt me. I felt cornered again, but I stood my ground, reminding them of how they had abandoned me when I needed them most. I ended the conversation, telling them I wanted nothing to do with them and that they should leave. After they left, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. I had hoped they might have come to apologize, but instead, they attempted to manipulate me for financial support. In the following days, I received several emails from my mother, where she reminded me of all she had done for me throughout my life. These messages only served to reinforce my decision to keep my distance. I replied to her, reiterating how their choices had hurt me and how I was no longer willing to entertain their guilt trips. I told her that I felt no obligation to help them after how they treated me. The lack of remorse from my mother only fueled my resolve. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself spiraling. I had always been the one to support myself, yet here I was, caught in a web of emotional turmoil stemming from my mother's manipulation. I sought guidance online, hoping to find some clarity about my situation and whether I was in the wrong for refusing to assist them. Then everything escalated further. One afternoon, I received a call from my workplace. My mother had shown up, demanding to speak to me. The receptionist explained that she was causing a scene, insisting on meeting me immediately. I had taken a day off due to feeling unwell, and I was relieved I hadn't been there. When my mother found out I wasn't at work, she left, but not before causing a ruckus. I felt my blood boil as I realized she still had no respect for my boundaries. I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with her, yet she continued to push her way back into my life. My mother's antics escalated to an alarming level when she showed up at my home a few days later. I had just returned from work, and there she was standing outside my door. I told her I wasn't in the mood to argue and warned her that if she didn't leave, I would call the police. What happened next was shocking. Instead of walking away, she charged at me and tackled me to the ground. My phone flew out of my hands as I tried to defend myself against her irrational outburst. She was screaming, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. It was surreal and terrifying to witness my mother's descent into madness. Fortunately, my neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. They arrived just in time to see my mother's violent outburst. After assessing the situation, I decided to press charges against her. The police took her away, and the reality of what had happened began to sink in. With the help of a lawyer, I filed for our restraining order against her. It was a sobering experience, but I knew I had to protect myself. My grandparents were informed about the situation and expressed their support for my decision. They had maintained contact with my mother to keep a relationship with their other grandchildren, but they made it clear they didn't condone her behavior toward me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt empowered by my decision to stand up for myself, but also worried about what my mother might do next. Would she try to contact me again? Would she escalate her behavior? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Then came the day of the court hearing for the restraining order. I sat nervously in the waiting room, my stomach churning as I thought about what had transpired between my mother and me. I had never imagined it would come to this, having to legally distance myself from my own mother. But I had to remind myself of why I was doing this, for my own safety and well-being. When my mother entered the courtroom, she looked different, angry and unhinged. She shot me a glare that sent shivers down my spine. I focused on the judge as he called the case, trying to block out her presence. My lawyer presented the evidence of her violent behavior, and my neighbors testified about the incident they witnessed. I felt a rush of gratitude for their support. As the judge listened to the testimonies, I could see my mother's anger boiling over. She tried to interject, claiming that I was overreacting and that I had always been the ungrateful one. I felt a wave of frustration as she twisted the narrative, but my lawyer quickly shut her down. After what felt like an eternity, the judge ruled in my favor, granting me the restraining order. The relief washed over me like a warm blanket, but the reality of the situation hit hard. I was officially estranged from my mother, and it was a choice I had to make for my own sanity. With the restraining order in place, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. I no longer had to worry about her barging into my life, trying to manipulate or guilt me. My friends and family rallied around me, offering their support and reminding me that I was not alone in this battle. However, the emotional scars ran deep. I began to seek therapy to work through the trauma of my past and to understand the complex feelings I had toward my mother. My therapist helped me unpack my emotions, guiding me through the anger, sadness, and confusion that had been bottled up inside me for so long. It was a difficult process, but I was determined to heal. As I focused on my personal growth, I found myself thriving in my career. With my hard work and determination, I had built a successful career for myself. I was no longer the child who felt abandoned and unwanted. I was a strong, independent adult making my way in the world. I also started to reconnect with friends and build a support system that had been lacking for years. They encouraged me to share my story, and through that, I found solace in realizing that I wasn't alone. Many people had experienced similar situations with family dynamics, and I began to embrace my journey as a way to inspire others. As the months passed, my life continued to improve. I moved into a new apartment, a fresh start away from the memories of my past. I decorated it with artwork and photographs that made me happy, transforming it into a sanctuary where I could fully embrace my individuality. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from my uncle. He expressed concern about my well-being and asked if I would be open to having a conversation. I was hesitant at first, but remembered that he had been supportive throughout my life. After some reflection, I decided to meet with him. When we sat down, he apologized for unintentionally bringing my mother back into my life. He didn't realize the turmoil it would cause, and he genuinely wanted to make amends. We spoke openly about the challenges we both faced with our family, and I appreciated his honesty. It was a step toward healing, and I felt a sense of closure in our conversation. In the following months, I focused on my future, setting new goals and aspirations for myself. I wanted to travel, explore new cultures, and immerse myself in experiences that would broaden my horizons. I saved money and started planning a trip to Europe, a dream I had held on to for years. As I prepared for my journey, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of my past no longer held me captive. Instead, it became a part of my story, a story of resilience and strength. I had learned to prioritize my well-being and surround myself with people who truly valued and loved me. On the day of my departure, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was stepping out into the world, ready to embrace whatever adventures awaited me. My friends gathered to see me off, their encouragement fueling my confidence. As I boarded the plane, I felt free for the first time in years. Traveling through Europe was everything I had imagined and more. I wandered through cobblestone streets, indulged in delicious food, and marveled at breathtaking architecture. Each experience was a reminder that life was about embracing opportunities and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Upon returning home, I felt rejuvenated and inspired. I had learned so much about myself and what it meant to create a life filled with joy and fulfillment. My relationship with my uncle remained strong, and I began to reconnect with my grandparents, who were always there to offer love and support. In the end, my mother's choices no longer defined me. I had broken free from the shackles of manipulation and learned to love myself unconditionally. It was a journey filled with pain and heartbreak, but it had ultimately led me to a place of healing and strength. I realized that family isn't always about blood, it's about the connections we choose to foster. I had built my own family, a family of friends, mentors, and loved ones who uplifted and supported me. As I looked forward to the future, I knew that I was capable of overcoming any challenge that came my way. The choices we make shape our lives, and while my mother's choices hurt me deeply, they also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the power of love. I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, and I wouldn't have it any other way.